years old. And people are also looking for answers about what exactly happened the day that she died. Now, as of today, there is still an active investigation by the Greenville City Police Department in South Carolina, and the DEA is involved at the federal level. Now, we're also still waiting for the toxicology reports. That's going to be huge when those come in, but those can take anywhere from weeks to months to complete. And while there are currently no arrests made in connection to Panettiere's death, there are some new details about her alleged toxic relationship with a man named Brian Hickerson. And those allegations are coming to the forefront. And that includes a history of domestic violence, which Hayden addressed publicly in the past. And most recently, her own mom accused Hickerson of pawning off Hayden Panettiere's belongings. And remember, he was also at the scene when Hayden was found unresponsive. So, as you can imagine, speculation has been mounting about whether he could have had some role in what happened to Hayden, though we want to be clear that no criminal charges have been filed as of yet, and he has not been accused of any crime.
The relationship was toxic. That was the phrase used by the mother of the deceased. Not alleged, not suspected, stated as fact. And then, without pausing for breath, she added the detail that changes the entire shape of this story. The boyfriend pawned her belongings. A vintage guitar, personal property, the physical residue of a life, moved into a storage unit, priced, and sold while the owner was still alive to be shocked by it. Before we go deeper into what the documents actually show, make sure you're subscribed to Crime Files 911, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. Picture a pawn shop ticket, the kind with carbon paper behind it. The clerk's handwriting is rushed, the description vague. One guitar. Used. It sits in a drawer in a storage unit that the renter could no longer afford. The ticket is not a crime. It is a timestamp. It proves that while one person was still fighting to reclaim her life, someone else was already liquidating it. That piece of paper is the whole story. The public record in this matter reads like a study in controlled demolition. You have a woman with a documented history of vulnerability. You have a man with a documented history of violence against her. You have a 5-year protective order that expired in April. And you have a death in August. That is not a narrative. That is a sequence. And sequences are what investigators reconstruct. The Greenville City Police Department has confirmed that its investigation remains active. The Drug Enforcement Administration has federal involvement. That is not speculation. That is what happens when a death occurs across state lines and the circumstances demand a broader jurisdictional lens. The initial police report noted no signs of foul play. The preliminary autopsy found no physical trauma. Those are facts, but they are not conclusions. A toxicology report remains pending. That report will determine what was in her system. The 9 medications listed in the police report are redacted. 9. That is not a typo. A bag of medication was handed to law enforcement at the scene. The names were blacked out. The public will not see them. But the investigators will.
CNN. An officer on scene interviewed the brothers, who said that they called 911. The officer reportedly spoke with Zach Hickerson first, who advised that Hayden was his brother's girlfriend. Page 6 also cites from the report that Brian then handed law enforcement a, quote, bag of medication that Hayden was taking at the time of her death, though the names of the medications were redacted. But there were 9 different medications reportedly listed. Now, Narcan was also reportedly found on scene when first responders arrived. The police report also notes that Zach was, quote, very emotional while medical personnel were working on reviving Hayden, but Brian did not become visibly emotional until Hayden Panettiere was declared dead. Now, police said that the preliminary investigation did not indicate any sign of foul play or suspicious circumstances, nor did the initial autopsy find signs of physical trauma or foul play. But, as we mentioned earlier, this investigation remains active through.
Here is where the irony becomes structural. The man who handed over that bag of medication was the same man who had been ordered by a court to stay away from her. The same man who pleaded no contest to 2 felony domestic violence charges. The same man sentenced to 45 days in jail and ordered into a year-long domestic violence treatment program. The same man who attempted, unsuccessfully, to have his felony convictions reduced to misdemeanors. Twice, once as recently as this month.
Court documents reveal that he was sentenced to 45 days in jail in April 2021 after pleading no contest to 2 felony domestic violence charges for injuring Panettiere. That sentence also came with a 5-year protection order, which expired this past April. Hickerson even came out and apologized after the memoir was released, saying it was true that he was in a dark place that included substance issues, and that it was a, quote, terrible thing I did to her, end quote. The New York Times reports back in August 2022, Hickerson was found in violation of his probation conditions after he and Panettiere were filmed in a brawl with other people outside the Sunset Marquis Hotel in West Hollywood, and he had to complete a year-long domestic violence treatment program, attend Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, and complete dozens of anger management sessions. This is all according to court records. He even tried to get the court to reduce his felony convictions to misdemeanors in 2025, but that was unsuccessful, with another attempt to do so as recently as this month, according to court records.
Let that sit for a moment. In the same month that he was asking a judge to legally downgrade what he did to her, she was found unresponsive in a rental unit with him present. That is not an accusation. That is a court docket.
In connection to what happened to Hayden Panettiere, but we are learning some new information about, frankly, a troubled past between the late actress and Hickerson. Now, Panettiere had accused Hickerson of domestic abuse, particularly in her memoir, just a few months ago. She wrote, quote, "What I never told them was that the abuse I'd endured didn't feel as bad as the thought of being alone," end quote. The New York Times is reporting that back in March, Panettiere had reportedly hired security to keep Hickerson away. This is the same person she was found with on the day that she died. Court documents reveal that he was sentenced to 45 days in jail in April 2021 after pleading no contest to 2 felony domestic violence charges for injuring Panettiere. That sentence also came with a 5-year protection order, which expired this past April. Hickerson even came out and
Nobody asked. Nobody answered. The neighbor accounts add a layer that no press release can sanitize. A woman in West Hollywood told Page 6 that she saw visible red marks and bruises on 2 separate occasions. She said it appeared she had been beaten. She said it did not appear to be anything else. The Homeowners Association posted warning signs with his face on them. The sign instructed people to call 911 immediately if he was seen on the property. That is not a rumor. That is a physical sign, printed, posted, seen.
Incidents were. Mia Terrazas, a neighbor of Hayden Panettiere in West Hollywood, California, told Page 6 in an interview that she saw Hayden with visible, bright, red spots and bruises being taken out of her Los Angeles apartment in a gurney on 2 different occasions in 2023 and 2024. So you're seeing these accusations build up year in and year out. Terrazas told Page 6, quote, "It appeared that she had been beaten up. It wasn't apparent to me that it could have been anything else," end quote, adding that Hayden Panettiere allegedly often looked, quote, battered. According to TMZ, Panettiere's HOA also hung up warning posters back in 2025 with Hickerson's face urging people to call 911 immediately to report that he is trespassing on the premises. That neighbor also told Page 6 that she called police several times to report Hickerson at Panettiere's home, though, according to her, Brian allegedly...
And yet, the relationship continued. That is the part that defies the standard categories. People want to know why she did not leave. The legal record shows she tried. She hired security in March. She was estranged from her mother for months. The memoir she wrote detailed abuse. She knew. The paperwork already knew
about the couple's relationship from her point of view. So last week, Vogel told NBC News in part, quote, "This person in her life that we have been trying to get rid of for quite some time was with her at her death, and that was Brian Hickerson. I think Hayden was an amazingly talented person in so many departments. And I think young people who grow up in the entertainment industry, it is a struggle. And it's a very challenging industry. And it's not unusual for them to sadly find the wrong path. I think it becomes very difficult to be true to yourself. And I think Hayden sadly lost her way. And I wish it were different. I wish she had stayed true to herself because she had so many incredible attributes, end quote. Now, Vogel pushed back on criticism for that statement in an interview on Good Morning America.
Now consider the timeline the brother gave to the media. He knocked loudly. The boyfriend woke from a nap. They tried to wake her for lunch. She was unconscious. CPR was performed. Narcan was administered. 7 minutes later, first responders arrived. She was pronounced dead at 2032 in the afternoon. The question that emerges from that timeline is not an accusation. It is a physics problem. How does a person sleep through the death of someone in the same room? The mother asked the same question.
Vogel told the New York Times, quote, "She was courageous, she was a fighter, but deep down inside, I think Hayden was extremely vulnerable." Vogel also told ABC News in part, quote, "She knew that Brian was toxic. She knew she had to get him out of her life." Now, in an interview that Vogel did with the Daily Mail, she also had this interview published over the weekend. Vogel claimed that she spoke with a police officer at the scene of Hayden Panettiere's death, and she asked if there would be a further investigation. And Vogel claims the officer brought up Brian Hickerson's name, and Vogel allegedly told the officer she thought that he would be culpable. Now, again, no charges have been filed in this case, and Brian Hickerson has not been accused of any wrongdoing. Vogel also told the Daily Mail that she found Brian's timeline of events to be, quote, "full of holes," including when he allegedly found Panettiere unresponsive. Now, Vogel said, quote, "I don't know how you can take a nap near someone who is dying."
The answer matters because the answer determines whether the scene was accidental or curated.
Retired detective, former chief investigator is going to be here to talk a little bit about what goes into an investigation like this. But first, I want to walk through everything that we know so far about what happened to Hayden Panettiere. So according to a report from TMZ, Hayden and 37-year-old Brian Hickerson traveled to Greenville, South Carolina together on August 15th. And that is where they rented an Airbnb. Now, his brother is named Zach, and he was staying in his own Airbnb in the Greenville area. So then we go to August 16th. So a day after they arrive in South Carolina, Zach told TMZ that he was trying to get into Brian and Hayden's Airbnb after returning from church, since they reportedly had plans to go get lunch and play some indoor golf after church. He then told the publication, quote, "I knocked loudly," which apparently woke Brian up from a nap they were both taking on the pullout couch bed in the living room. "When we went in and tried to wake Hayden up for lunch, we realized she was unconscious," end quote. Zach reportedly called 911, and at around 1:51 p.m., he tells police that Hayden was unresponsive and in cardiac arrest, with dispatch audio released in the case indicating that it was an apparent, quote, "overdose." But still, at this point, there's been no official cause of death released for Hayden Panettiere. Now, at the same time that Zach was calling 911, Brian, the boyfriend, was allegedly administering Narcan on the actress. That's that nasal medication that can be used to reverse the effects of an opioid overdose. Zach told TMZ that the brothers performed CPR on Hayden while on speaker with 911 as they waited for fire and EMS to arrive. 7 minutes later, first responders arrive on scene and they begin life-saving measures, but tragically,
the DEA's involvement signals that the medication itself is now evidence. Not just the bottles, the pills, the quantities, the prescribing doctors, the pharmacy records, the text messages, the financial transactions. A retired detective would tell you that the first thing you do in a case like this is count the pills. Check the dates. Look for missing refills. Look for payments made through apps that do not leave obvious traces. The phone becomes the ledger. The body becomes the receipt.
Well, first we have to remember one thing, and I'm going to make a statement here that we can actually apply to so many of the high-profile cases happening right now. And an investigation is not an accusation, right? Investigation is necessary, and sometimes it eliminates all of these possibilities that we're looking at. And here we have a very complicated history. We have a young, talented, dynamic star who had been struggling with various issues by her own admission. She was struggling with addiction with both alcohol and substance. We know by her own admission in police records there was domestic violence in this relationship. In all likelihood, we're looking at coercive control between her and Brian, this on again, off again relationship. We see her stepping forward in May. And May is an interesting point. If I'm taking a look at the victimology here of Hayden as I'm going back, and that's one of the things that investigators will do, is I'm going to look at this May time period pretty closely here. Because in May, she had come out, she's talking about all of these challenges that many of us wouldn't have the intestinal fortitude to admit about our lives, where our lives have taken this wrong turn or a sad turn. And here she is being strong and admitting these things, talking about a contentious, difficult, challenging relationship with her mother, with these addiction issues, with domestic violence. And even reporting shows that she had her security detail, or someone had the security detail, instructed to keep Brian away from her while she's on this book tour. Days before Hayden died, we know that there was a hearing where Brian's sobriety was brought up and questioned at this hearing. And then just a matter of days later, when she goes from people keeping Brian away from her, here she is traveling with him across the country, and then she's dead.
And here is the ticking clock. If a single pill found in that bag was not prescribed to her, if a single transaction traces back to a source outside a pharmacy, this stops being a tragedy and becomes a federal case.
Well, the criminality I'm looking at is, and the Matthew Perry investigation is a very good one to take a look at. We have doctors that were overprescribing, the lure of money and making extra money, maybe the inability to say no. I am looking to see who was enabling her, who was providing her. I'm looking at apps like Telegram, Signal, WhatsApp to see what secret, maybe illicit messaging was going on. Who's providing her what? It becomes criminal when you go beyond a doctor's prescription, right? And you have those in her circle, maybe somebody that was trying to exert some type of control over her, supplying her, feeding her needs to make her more dependent on them. That's one of the things that we have to look at. Brian, and the history of domestic violence in this case, doesn't mean guilt, but it's something that we have to look at very, very closely and very tightly just to see what pressure he may have been applying.
Generally speaking, when you think of like enabling someone, like that particular word, like there might be a case where there's someone who is dealing with addiction, and sadly for themselves, they can't be stopped, and they find a way to deal with that. And that may be alcohol, that may be drugs. I mean, there's a lot of people who can talk about that, firsthand, or maybe it's impacted their family. But at what point does enabling become criminal? I know with like a doctor, if they're prescribing something, using their power as a doctor to give someone more medication than they actually need, like that, as we saw in the Matthew Perry case, like that's criminal. But like, even if you have someone like a partner, and in this case, a relationship that appears to have been toxic, to say the least, up and down for sure, like at what point does that enabling become criminal?
The question is not whether she had a problem. She admitted she did. The question is who fed the problem, who profited from the problem, and who was present when the problem became fatal.
Dead. So I want to be taking a look at a lot of things, and timeline's a big one. What did Brian say at the time that police arrived? What did he say the circumstances were? We know that there's video of this complex where they were staying, and according to police reporting, there is a video of Brian, his brother, and Hayden coming and going. I'm tightening tightline, and I'm going to be asking about these medications. Who prescribed them?
Yeah, the medications is interesting. She, again, by her own admission, postpartum depression, is something that she struggled with. I mean, you just think of the trauma of being in multiple relationships where there were accusations of domestic violence, not just with, her current boyfriend, but, she talked about it in relationships in the past. And then you have addiction issues. She also, though, relatively young person, 9 medications she was prescribed. We don't know what those are. Those were redacted in the police report, but
Right.
just that number, from a law enforcement standpoint, what does that tell you?
Well, I'm looking in that, and we know from reporting that she was having some health related issues, and I think her mother had even commented about health related issues that maybe the are caused by some of her other addiction issues. I think there was an accident in one of the filmings that she did that had caused her some pain. I want to look specifically at what she was prescribed. Once the toxicology comes in, I want to see if everything matches up. But while I'm waiting, I'm looking at the pills and I'm looking at who prescribed them, what pills were in the containers. Are the pills correct? I mean, are they the pills that are supposed to be in the pill containers? Because a lot of people mix those around. We can't just look at the bottle and say for sure what's inside. If I have any question about whether those pills are actual um, copycat pills, I'm going to have those pills tested. I'll ask the DA to assist with that. I'm counting how many there were, how many she should have had. And I'm going to look for evidence of like cleanup at the apartment. I'm going to look for evidence that maybe somebody else was supplying her other things while I'm waiting for this toxicology to come in.
And
Her mother's statements to the New York Times and the Daily Mail are not sealed court filings, but they are public record of a kind. She said Brian pawned items, including a vintage guitar. She said the items were in his storage unit. She said Hayden was shocked when she found out. That is the detail that should reframe everything. Because a person who is planning to build a future does not sell their partner's past for quick cash. A person who is preparing to leave does not suddenly find their belongings converted into someone else's property.
struggled, and Brian came into her life. She was vulnerable. She told the Daily Mail in a separate interview published this weekend that the relationship became deeply codependent as drugs allegedly became a part of their lives. Now, in a New York Times interview, Hayden's mom said she became alarmed that Brian Hickerson, who reportedly filed for bankruptcy in 2022, had pawned some of Panettiere's belongings, including a vintage guitar. The New York Times also said they independently verified this information through their own source. Vogel also told the New York Times that Panettiere herself appeared shocked when she found out that some of her belongings were in Hickerson's.
The storage unit is the metaphor, not the courtroom, not the body. The storage unit, because that is where the financial dependency lived. That is where the control was exercised. He did not need to lock her in a room. He just needed to make sure she had nothing left to hold on to. It was signed, then forgotten. The civil and criminal records tell a story that predates the death by years. The probation violations, the brawl outside the hotel in West Hollywood, the anger management sessions, the Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, the judge who refused to reduce the felonies. That judge saw something. The HOA board saw something. The neighbors saw something. The security team saw something. The mother saw something. The only person who apparently did not see something was the man sleeping next to her on the pullout couch. And that is the contradiction that the final toxicology report will either resolve or deepen. If the levels are therapeutic, the questions get harder. If the levels are toxic, the sourcing questions begin. If the phone records show messages deleted in the hours before the 911 call, that is consciousness of guilt, even if no one is ever charged. The absence of charges today is not the absence of evidence, it is the absence of completion.